É economista e professor de Políticas Públicas na Universidade da Califórnia, em Berkeley. Serviu 3 administrações norte-americanas, a última como secretário do Trabalho de Bill Clinton. Foi considerado pela Time como um dos 10 membros de governo mais eficientes do século XX. É autor de quase 2 dezenas de obras, muitas delas dedicadas ao estudo da desigualdade. Robert Reich é convidado deste Fronteiras 21, uma parceria da RTP com a Fundação Manuel dos Santos. Professor Robert Reich, welcome to the program. Thank you for being with us. Let me start off by asking you, why is inequality worsening despite, I would say, the unprecedented increase in productivity?
Well, inequality is certainly increasing dramatically in this worldwide pandemic. And that's largely because people who are relatively poor or who are working or had been working in retail, restaurant, or the hospitality industries, they have either lost their jobs or they find themselves more likely to be infected by COVID. And obviously, this has driven poverty into deeper levels of poverty. At the other end of the income ladder, people who are managerial and professional, they are not only keeping their jobs, many of them, they are working remotely, some of them, but they are also, if they're high-level management, seeing their stock portfolios increase in value. The value of high technology firms or anyone associated with high-tech firms increases and has increased during this pandemic. And so we see that the pandemic has generated wider inequality than we had before. But even before the pandemic, we saw inequality increasing in the United States and in Europe. And the issue there has more to do with structural changes in the economy over time. Education, technology, globalization, all of these have played a major role in making the rich richer and more politically powerful in many countries, and making the poor and the middle class more precarious, more insecure.
As you said, Professor, USA tends to be the direction in which many European countries are moving. So how serious is the problem in Europe?
The problem in Europe is serious. I would say it is not nearly as serious as it is in the United States, but Europe is moving toward American levels of inequality, and for many of the same reasons. Partly it's due to technological change, which has displaced many workers who are in routine occupations that can easily be done more cheaply by automation, by machinery, by advanced digital technologies. Partly it's due to the ease with which companies can outsource abroad many jobs. And partly it's due to increasing pressure on companies from financial markets to maximize shareholder returns. All of these have conspired to widen inequality, even in Europe. Finally, I want to mention one other. It's a very delicate issue, but as wealth concentrates at the top, so does power. Power over our political and economic systems, so that the rules of the game, even the rules of capitalism, change over time. And over the last 2 decades, for example, they have changed in the direction of helping the wealthy preserve and protect and enlarge their wealth, while at the same time putting greater stress on the middle class and the working class.
I would like to understand how economic inequality affects children's outcomes. Let me say, is there upward mobility, or children born in poverty will stay there?
It is very difficult in Europe and terribly difficult in the United States for children born in poverty to get out of poverty. In America, we know, for example, that 40% of children who are born into the bottom fifth by income will stay in that bottom fifth for their entire lives. In Europe, it's not quite as bad, but it is moving in that direction. In Britain, for example, about 30% of the children who are born in the bottom fifth by income will stay there as adults. In the rest of Europe, it's about 25 to 30%, but it is moving in the direction of the United States for a simple reason, and that is if you are born poor, your access to both education and also the connections you need to move upward are diminished dramatically.
Mm-hmm. And the traditional avenues of improvement, such as higher education, still work?
They work to a limited extent. That is, once you get beyond a certain percentage of your population having a college or university degree, that university degree ceases to have very much significance in the job market. If you have more than, say, 45 to 50% of your young people with a university degree, that university degree no longer gives them a guaranteed step into the middle class. In fact, there is pressure to get even more advanced degrees, but of course, that doesn't help either. What we are finding in Europe and in the United States is that more and more college graduates are overqualified for the jobs that they are eligible for, that they can get.
Mm-hmm. And how effective is technical education in enhancing employment, for example?
If the technical education is extremely well done, and I'll use Germany as an example, Germany has for 50 years developed a technical education, particularly in precision manufacturing and in engineering. That technical education is so world-class in terms of the quality of that education that many German workers who have not attended college or university nevertheless are doing relatively well. But technical education, to take the opposite extreme in the United States, is rather poor. It is considered to be second or third class. Technical education is regarded as something of a disgrace or an impediment rather than a help. Now, let me just give you the economic reality. We are moving into, as rapidly as we can, a very complex digitized economy. We have a lot of new gadgets, new machinery that needs to be installed and upgraded and maintained. And that installation, upgrading, and maintenance requires a lot of skill, more and more skill. So in theory, at least, we could educate a whole generation and a significant number of young people in technical skills that pay rather well if the education was well done and if it were connected to the particular skills needed.
Mm-hmm. Professor, the school closings due to coronavirus concerns have turned like a spotlight on inequities. What are the consequences of proceeding with online instruction when not everyone can access it? And in meanwhile, I would ask you also if is there an alternative?
We don't know yet very much because it's only been since March that many of our young people, both in Europe and in the United States, have had online education as opposed to in-person education. But what we do know on the basis of the limited research that has been done is that lower middle class and poor children from families that are in lower incomes have a harder time learning through online remote laptop computers than other children that have many other educational advantages at home. This is partly because not all low-income children have laptop computers or the kind of access to digital learning that they need. It's expensive. I think it's very important for governments to make sure, if we are moving to online education, that every young person is equipped with exactly the computer and digital equipment that they need. But beyond that, very often parents, particularly parents who have not had very much education, don't know how to help their children learn, if the children are quite young, through digital or online education, as opposed to the parents of relatively well-educated uh, families. They do know, they do have experience with digital equipment and digital technological education, and so they're able to help their children. This makes a huge difference. The home environment makes a very large difference if we are moving, as we have to move in this pandemic, to online education. It widens inequality.
Professor, focus now on employment. Millennials are on the track to be the first generation not to exceed their parents in terms of job status and income. Why is that happening? And again, what are the consequences?
It's happening for a wide variety of reasons. I touched on some of them having to do with technology and globalization, but I also want to stress housing. Young people cannot afford, in many cases, to have their own homes. They can't afford to even pay the down payments for their own homes. Housing is becoming unaffordable to an entire generation of young people. That's partly because there is not enough housing. That's partly because older people are staying in their homes. It's partly because the economy over the last 40 years has placed a premium on being in central cities, on being in capital cities. That's where the action is. That's where the best jobs are. And so the housing market is becoming more and more difficult. That has a lot to do, a large part of the problems that young people are facing has to do with the cost of housing.
Would you say that the lockdown generation is a lost generation?
I don't think it's a lost generation, but I do think it's very important that we bear in mind the centrality of public investment in everything from affordable housing to infrastructure to healthcare, all of the things that people need for a good life. We should also be seriously considering a universal basic income so that nobody is left to fall through the cracks, as it were, that nobody and no family really suffers from deep poverty. We are all, European countries and the United States, wealthy enough to ensure that all of our people have a minimally decent life. That's the critical issue.
Let's take a look at politics. Professor, you've been studying for years the relationship between economics, politics, and inequality. And I've heard you say that the great divide in American politics nowadays isn't between right or left, not even between Democrats and Republicans. It's a matter of power and inequality. I would like you to explain your theory to us. What is your point?
My point is that as more and more Americans, and this may also be the case, it certainly will be the case if trends continue in Europe, as more and more people feel that they are locked out of prosperity, that they don't have much upward mobility or chance of doing better, that their children don't have much chance, the more they feel that the game is rigged against them, the more susceptible they become to demagogues on the left or the right. But the more susceptible they also become to blaming others, blaming immigrants, blaming other countries, blaming minority groups, blaming anybody that a demagogue can easily blame, even though the demagogues are blaming people who are not responsible for the systemic changes that have made so many people vulnerable. That's what's happening in the United States right now. I don't want to spend our valuable time talking about Donald Trump, but he, in my view, is a clear and present danger to American democracy.
Donald Trump, Marine Le Pen, Brexit are the same phenomenon?
Not precisely the same phenomenon. I think that Brexit may be rooted in some of the same frustrations and some of the same anger. The drift of certain countries like Hungary to the right, I think, does have a connection to the Donald Trump phenomenon. That is, in the United States, and this is something that has been gradually increasing over the past 40 years, more and more people feel that they don't have a fair chance. They voted for Donald Trump in 2016 because they wanted somebody who would shake up the establishment, somebody who was anti-establishment. Now, of course, they found somebody in Donald Trump who was a Trojan horse for the wealthy, for the establishment, because Donald Trump has done everything that the wealthy want, reducing their taxes, rolling back regulations. But nevertheless, he poses as a populist. He poses as somebody who is a person of the people. This is exactly what Mussolini did. This is similar to what Franco did. We understand from history how this happens, and we understand the connection between economics and politics and this form of neo-fascism.
Despite all you've said, Professor, the states with the largest increases in inequality, they voted for Clinton.
They voted for Clinton because these states, that is California, New York, New England, Massachusetts, these states have a very, even though their inequality is great, those who are poor have more chance of upward mobility under democratic administrations, and they know this. These are also states that don't have the same history of racism and, let's face it, a history that goes all the way back to slavery. Part of the legacy that Donald Trump has built upon is a legacy of very sharp and terrible, cruel racism and slavery that ended officially in the United States in the 1860s, but the legacy of which is still very much present in several states in the United States.
And what about Portugal, Professor? Are we at risk also?
Portugal is obviously a very different country, a very different culture than the United States, but the risk is still there. Portugal has among the highest inequality of European countries. And because of that, and because of frustrations among those who feel that they are being excluded or held back, there is always the possibility. Now, again, I want to be very careful in what I say, because I'm not an expert in Portugal, and I want everybody to understand that I am not trying to assume or presume any expertise. But I do want to warn everyone there that the path toward inequality, widening inequality, and stagnant wages for the majority is a path that risks demagoguery and potentially the loss of democracy. In the United States, we had a great justice of the Supreme Court in the 1920s, the last time we had this degree of inequality, who said, America faces a choice. The choice is either great wealth in the hands of very few people or a democracy, but we cannot have both. That Justice Louis Brandeis understood that great wealth means great power in the hands of very few people. I'm not predicting this for Portugal. I'm just simply warning that Portugal could be on the same path as many other countries in terms of risking the loss of democracy as wealth concentrates at the top.
Mm-hmm. And what can be done to reverse the trend, or to use your own words, to fix the system?
Basically, there is no one magic solution. There are a whole variety of solutions. I've mentioned universal basic income. Another one is to help subsidize public jobs. Another is to provide people with the degree of security they need so that they don't feel that they're part of the precariat, as the word goes, that they understand and feel that even if they are unlucky economically, that there still will be a strong safety net to protect them. Also, at the same time, helping young people, children from poor families, from working class families, have the every opportunity to get ahead. And that means more money spent on their young schooling, on preschool, on early childhood education. Very important in terms of the futures of these young people.
Professor, thank you for your time, for this interview. We're looking forward to see you in Portugal when this crisis is over. Thank you once more. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your time, and thank you very much for your effort today. I very much look forward to my visit to Portugal, and I wish I could be there at this very moment.
It has been a pleasure. Thank you once again.